Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the assumptions we're going to make about the voters' preferences. Because the underlying assumption is that the voter ranks the candidates somehow, has a particular preference ordering over the candidates, and chooses a ballot or votes for particular candidates based on those preferences. There's a few things that I want you to remember. So first of all, preferring or choosing X is very different than liking or having a taste for X. One can prefer X to Y, but completely dislike both options. Many of you are probably thinking about the political situation right now, and you think, yeah, exactly, that's exactly right. I don't like any of the options in front of me, but yet I still have to come to some preference ordering over the candidates. So it's important to remember that preferring is different than just, straight out liking or desiring these two candidates, or one of the candidates over another one. Second, it's important to distinguish between ordinal information and cardinal information over the voter's preferences. So let me illustrate. Suppose that we have this voter, and the voter ranks A above B above C. And that's what we know. All we know is that the relative ranking of the different candidates is that the voter prefers A over B, and prefers B over C, and also prefers A over C, and does not have any of the reverse preferences, so is not indifferent. This is strict preference ordering. Now, from that information alone, this is the voter's ordinal information. It's just the ordering of the particular candidates. We cannot read off how much the voter prefers candidate A over candidate B relative to, say, how much the candidate prefers B over C. So we can't distinguish the situation where the candidate just likes A over B and B over C, and the differences in preference are the same, between a situation in which candidate or the voter really strongly prefers candidate A, absolutely only would vote for candidate A, and the other two candidates doesn't really like, but ranks them, thinks that B is slightly better than C, versus a situation where the voter really likes candidates A and B, but has a sort of a slight preference for candidate A over B, but strongly prefers both A and B over candidate C. So note the adjectives that I'm using. Stronger preference, only slightly prefers this candidate over the next. These type of quantitative adjectives can only be used if we have cardinal information about the voter's preferences. So in voting situations, both types of information are important. As you can imagine, a voter entering the booth that has this ranking is very different than a voter entering a voting booth that has that ranking. And it's important to distinguish both ordinal and cardinal information, and I will just try the best I can to be explicit about which type of information is relevant. And finally, it's important to distinguish between the voter's preferences and the ballot that a voter chooses in a voting situation. So think of the board account voting system, or the board account voting rule. That requires the voters to linearly rank all of the candidates. So a voter's preference, his deliberative preference, a preference he deliberates to, might be to be indifferent between all of the candidates. But in order to use board account, you have to choose a ballot that linearly ranks all of the candidates. So the ballot, even if the ballot is itself a ranking or a preference ordering over all of the candidates, it's important to distinguish that ballot from the voters' preferences. And in fact, even if the voters' preferences is a linear ordering, so it matches the ballot, there might be reasons for the voter not to choose a ballot that truthfully reflects the voters' preferences. So this would be situations of when a voter strategizes, chooses a ballot that somehow misrepresents the voter's actual preferences. We'll talk about these issues later in the course. Now, of course, there's a lot more that I can say about the voters' preferences. There's more that I can tell you about the mathematical framework that we're going to use to describe the voters' preferences. There's much, much more to say about the underlying assumptions we're making about what it means to say that a voter is rational or making a rational choice. And there's, of course, it's not always clear. The voter has various opinions and judgments about the candidates and somehow has to turn that or express that as a, say, ranking over the candidates, or by selecting a particular candidate, or by approving of some of the candidates. So there's much more to say about both the psychology of how voters decide or choose to vote for a particular candidate when they enter when they're making a particular choice, and also the underlying mathematical framework that we're using to describe the voters' preferences. And I've created a couple of videos to talk about just that. They just touch on some of these broader issues about describing about preferences, rational choice, and other related issues. And those are in the background section. Now, you don't necessarily have to watch those videos in order to understand the remaining lectures in this section in the remaining weeks. But of course, for those of you who have never seen this material before, I encourage you to take a look at those videos, because it'll help you understand some of the broader questions, broader assumptions we're making about how a voter decides to rank, what it means to say a voter ranks the candidates, and how we're actually thinking about that, how we're representing that.